everyone. This is author H. Allegra Lansing, you can call me Allie, back with another edition of Alive with Allie with some pretty big breaking news. So as a true crime researcher, I have to admit I get pretty stoked when I discover something that has been hidden, misreported, or is otherwise a mystery. Today, I'm going to reveal the real name of someone associated with the Manson family, someone I've been trying to find for several years. As a reminder, I was the one who found the true name of little Patty, who was known by more than 50 years as Madeline Cottage. Her real name, I discovered, was Patricia Joan Baldwin, and she was from the Pittsburgh area where she continues to live today. I found her information using genealogy sites and searching under some of the aliases she was known by. Back in high school, little Patty was involved in drama club and cheerleading and many other activities. Her story will intersect with the tale I'm going to tell today. I want to give a huge shout out first to my buddy Dan Hale, who sent me information that helped me find this new information I was looking for. I really appreciate it, Dan. Thank you also to Jedediah Lobb Klein, who assisted me with some of the citations that I'm using in this video. Okay, so today I'm going to reveal the real identity of none other than elusive and shadowy figure, Bill Vance. First, a bit of general information about what we know of Vance up to this point. He's mentioned only very briefly in Helter Skelter. He's named as William Joseph Vance, alias David Lee Hammock. Blues, he talks about how Vance was present at the Venice beach home where John Philip Haught, aka Zero, died from a suspicious self-inflicted gunshot. And Vance is also mentioned in Helter Skelter in affiliation with Shorty Shea's murder.
What did he know about Shorty's disappearance? Well, a week or two after the raid, Shorty just wasn't around anymore. He'd asked Charlie if he knew where he was, and Charlie had told him, "He's gone to San Francisco about a job. I told him about a job there." He didn't exactly feel confident with that explanation, he said, not after having noticed that Bill Vance and Danny DiCarlo each had one of Shorty's .45 caliber pistols. Shorty would never willingly part with those matched pistols, Schwartz said, no matter how hard up he was.
Vance is also mentioned as inspiration for the idea to have some of the women work as topless dancers in early 1969, supposedly to earn money to buy dune buggies and weapons. We learn more about this part of his history and about Vance in Ed Saunders' The Family.
Bob Beausoleil had met Mr. Jack Gerard, the head of the Gerard Theatrical Agency, a company specializing in supplying actors and actresses for porno movies and topless dancers for nightclubs in the Los Angeles area. Beausoleil went to work for the Gerard Agency. Among his duties was delivering station wagons full of topless dancers to various clubs each night. When Beausoleil began talking about the Gerard Agency, Bill Vance became convinced, and Manson also became convinced that it would be possible to send some of the girls to the Gerard Agency to apply for jobs as topless dancers. Bill Vance agreed to act as the agent for the girls. He had all dressed up in a suit and tie, and the girls old enough to have ID got dolled up in high heels and costumes, thought befitting topless dancers. Charlie thought that each girl would make about $200 per week.
Paul Watkins, in his 1979 memoir, described Vance as,
"One of the new breed was Bill Vance, David Lee Hammock, an ex-con and friend of Charlie's who had recently been released from prison. Through Bill, we got access to the Gresham Street house. Bill was a hulking 6-footer in his 40s, with short brown hair, brown eyes, and a battered face. His nose looked like a disjointed mountain range. He'd done time with Charlie for robbery and assault, among other things. Bill hit it off with Ella right away, and Charlie used this liaison to his own advantage."
I'm going to discuss Bill's relationship with Ella Jo in just a few moments. In Manson, in his own words, Charlie, speaking to his biographer Newell Emmons, explained,
In the past, I hadn't sought the company of my old convict friends except for a select few who I liked putting on the dog for. Now I became less selective. I even made a few phone calls to some of the money-making thieves I knew. With 15 or 20 young lovelies in my household, getting a few thieves to lend a helping hand wasn't a problem at all. The best part was, with all the willing and skilled help I came up with, I didn't have to be at the scene of the crime.
And in reflection, Lynette Fromm introduces him simply as Cowboy Bill.
I was sitting on George's steps when Cowboy Bill approached, so I saw him from the ground up. Scuffed cowboy boots, long legs, short hair. He was rough around the edges and looked older than he probably was, smiling down on me paternally like he already knew me. I was suspicious. Resting a boot on the stoop, he paused before going inside.
I haven't seen George in years.
He told me.
And by the way, how's Charlie?
That cinched it. I figured him for a cop. But he lit a cigarette and continued.
Charlie and I go way back. We were in the joint together down south. You know what we used to do in the hole?
Now he had my interest.
Whoever had smokes would tie a cigarette, a match, and a little piece of the striker to the backs of these thumb-sized cockroaches, push them out the door, and send them down the tier.
I didn't believe him,
Really?
he said convincingly.
We had some good times, me and Charlie, smoking these thin little reefers.
Suddenly he took my face in his big hands and kissed me on the forehead. I rose, pulled away, and went straight into the house. It turned out that both George and Charlie did know Bill. What are the odds? And Bill had been filled in about Charlie and the rest of us by Pearl. And Bill wasn't moving in like I thought he was, but living somewhere in the valley. Charlie took bikers on some wild dune buggy rides. He composed a song with them in mind and interacted as if he lived in them. But despite their outlaw leanings, many of them were traditional in their thinking. Our ideas were new and strange to them, and if they saw a revolution coming, they didn't envision hiding in the desert. They seemed to be more about illicit ways to make money. Cowboy Bill was like that. He liked the rock and roll of robbing with no pesky ideological attachments.
Now, I don't know about you, but I was rather surprised when I read Lynn's memoir and found her to be much more intelligent than I had expected. In reflection, Lynn focuses on the good times with Charlie and the family, traveling the open road, living communally, life at Spawn Ranch. She doesn't discuss the murders or the trials or anything that came later. In some ways, the book feels rather whitewashed, like she's leaving out huge portions of the story. But I've come to realize that the book is really written in code. It's all there if you know what to look for. I believe that Lynn has included some coded messages about Cowboy Bill in the small sections she wrote about him. She says she's suspicious immediately upon seeing him. Is that because of the way he looks, or is it because of the way he's acting, so comfortable there at Spawn Ranch, so familiar with both George and Charlie? Is she telling us to be suspicious of him too? And the way she recounts that story about being in the hole, the cigarettes and cockroaches, feels scornful, like how dare he act like he knows Manson better than her? She treats him like an interloper, a dangerous one at that. She says she figured him for a cop. Now, we know there were at least a couple of informants at Spawn Ranch during the summer of 1969, and there has been some conjecture that Bill was one of them. He is an ex-convict out on parole. He's involved with crime, some pretty major thefts that he winds up committing during that season, and he walks away after all of this with little to no repercussions. Lynn mentions that Bill is living down in the valley. It's almost like she wants to separate herself and her family from Bill and his actions. He's down there, and they're up here. She says Bill is attracted to the illicit ways to earn money. She says he has no pesky ideological attachments, which I felt was a coded way of saying he had no ethics. Again, that he's different from them. They're stealing, but it's for a good reason, a purpose, a mission. So now I'm going to quickly go through some of the events of the summer of '69 as they pertain to Bill's movements and activities. In mid-July, when asked by Charlie who they knew who might have some money, Ella mentions Gary Hinman. She thought he had recently come into an inheritance. It wasn't true, and there's no way of knowing why she thought this, except perhaps she was aware that he'd paid for his upcoming trip to Japan and just assumed that meant he came into some kind of windfall. Approximately 2 weeks later, when the incident with the botched drug deal occurs, Bobby procures about $2,000 worth of mescaline from Gary to sell to the Straight Satans, who ride into Spawn Ranch the next morning claiming that the drugs were poison and demanding their money back. Charlie calls Gary Hinman, winds up yelling at him over the phone when he declines to reimburse the bikers, and then Charlie goes and tells Bobby he better go fix the situation. But before Charlie told Bobby to go talk to Hinman, he first approached Ella Jo and Bill. He asked them to go over there and talk to him and try to get the money back, and they declined. Ella then witnesses Bobby, Mary, and Sadie leave for Hinman's with Bruce Davis and Danny DiCarlo. She seems to know there's a shakedown about to happen, but not, of course, about the violence that's about to ensue. A couple days later, when Bobby and the women return with one of Gary's cars and his wallet, Ella helps Mary scrub the car and wallet of fingerprints, but she's troubled by news of his death. The next morning, likely July 27th, Ella and Bill are sitting outside Spawn Ranch in a pickup truck. They're both aware that Gary has been murdered, and Ella knows that she helped set this whole thing in motion. She's afraid, not that Charlie is going to kill her per se, but that either he will force her to commit murder or beat her severely for refusing. Bill asks Ella if she wants to leave the ranch, and she says, yeah. When asked a couple years later by investigators if Bill was also afraid of Charlie, she admitted, yeah. They mentioned that Bill's a big guy. Couldn't he hold his own physically against Manson? Ella says,
yeah, except Bill is slow and Charlie's quick. You know, Bill, I don't believe Bill's afraid of Charlie physically, but I believe Bill's afraid of Charlie, you know, because of his mind, maybe.
That July day, Bill and Ella approach Pat Krenwinkel. They know that Pat has been very unhappy in recent months, that Manson's physical violence toward her and the other women has been escalating, and that she'd been considering leaving. They asked Pat to join them as they traveled east and eventually down to Florida, knowing that she had family in nearby Alabama. But Pat declined, claiming that she knew Charlie would track her down if she left, so Bill and Ella departed by themselves. A couple weeks later, the couple were in Cleveland, Ohio. Bill is broke, but Ella Jo has a stolen credit card she's using to pay their way. Then she's arrested for using the card, and that is the last she sees of Bill. Her mother drove down from Holland, Michigan, and bailed Ella Jo out, bringing her back home where she remained until she was questioned a couple months later about the murder of Gary Hinman. And then later in the summer of '71, she flew out to California to testify at Manson, Grogan, and Davis's trial for Gary's death. Now, I'm going to assume that the reason Bill and Ella wound up in Ohio was because they first went to visit her family in Michigan, and then were driving south toward Florida when she was arrested. So we're to understand that Bill leaves Spawn Ranch with Ella Jo after the murder of Hinman because they're both scared of Charlie and being forced to do something they don't want to do. Bill takes Ella Jo all the way to Ohio with plans to continue on to Florida, and when she's arrested, with their only means of financial support, he just abandons her and immediately drives back to Spawn Ranch? Does this make any sense? Bill comes back to Spawn probably around August 17th, the day after the auto theft raid, and he leaves again a couple days later and drives to Oregon. When he returns from Oregon a week later, he has someone with him. Her name is Diane Von Ahn, and she's a resident of Gresham, Oregon, near Portland. Diane Von Ahn was born in November 1949 in Reno, Nevada, to an unwed mother, Patricia Louise Crandall. Her father's last name was Horn, and her mother was from Shasta, California. In 1955, when little Diana Marie, her full name, was 5 years old, her mother married Curtis Von Ahn, who worked for the U.S. Forest Service as a fireman based in Portland. But in 1962, Patricia died in a car accident near Cascade Locks. Diane was just 12 years old when her mother died so tragically. There is but one photo of Diane that I found from her high school yearbook. It's a group photo and it's not very clear, but here she is. Curtis was a veteran of the Army, and when his wife died, he commissioned a headstone that would be used for both of them. He lived another 47 years after Patricia's death, remarried, and had biological children, and yet, when he died in 2009, Patricia's headstone was marked with the details of his passing, although his family may have interred him elsewhere. In March 1969, Curtis remarried to his second wife, Geraldine. Diane was 19 years old at the time, just out of high school, and possibly unhappy that her stepdad was moving on with his life after 7 years grieving her mom. Imagine this unhappy young woman encountering Cowboy Bill with his grabby ways and colorful stories about prison. A lot of gals were vulnerable to tough old guys like Vance and Manson, and the story is chock full of these sad tales. We know that several women either come into the family through Bill or have a close association with him. Ella Jo, Little Patty, Diane Von Ahn, and Claudia Lee Smith. Was Bill a pimp? Or was he just a wannabe? Because sometimes it seems like Charlie looked up to Bill, but sometimes it seems like Bill had some hero worship going on for Manson. We know that Bill is back at Spawn Ranch from Oregon before August 26th because of what happens that day and the days prior. August 26th is the day that Shorty Shea was murdered. And in the days before Shorty's death, Bill and Vern Plumley and John Haught and Kenneth Brown are robbing people like there's no tomorrow. They were driving around San Fernando Valley that August, holding up gas stations. They used Wendy Buckley's pickup truck, that's Randy Starr's wife, to carry out their crimes. Buckley was pulled over by police after an APB was issued on the vehicle, and thankfully she proved that she was at work during the commission of the crimes. But when she realized what happened, she tore into Bill. Vance must have said something to Manson, who showed up at Buckley's house and punched her so hard that he broke her jaw. She actually had a gun in her hand at the time and tried to shoot him, but it failed to go off. Buckley was in the hospital for several days and visited there by Shorty Shea. With her jaw wired shut and a face purple with bruises, she was unable to explain what happened, but her roommate told Shorty what Charlie did. Buckley believes that this contributed to Shea's brutal murder just a few days later. Supposedly, Shorty went to Spawn Ranch and beat Charlie up, and within a day or so, Charlie ordered the ranch hand's demise. Now, it isn't until Bruce Davis's 2007 parole hearing that we learn that Bill was present at the murder of Shorty Shea.
I look around and there's Bill Vance, Tex Watson, Steve Grogan, with bloody knives, and they've been through this.
With these words, Davis doesn't just place Vance at the scene of the crime, he has him with a bloody knife, just like Tex and Clem. And in Manson, in his own words, Charlie is alleged to have told author Newell Emmons,
The DA, caught up in his theory of helter-skelter and obsessed with making the world believe I was a satanic Pied Piper, overlooked many participants, accessories, and conspirators. Someplace out there in that society he protects so well, he has left several killers to prowl the streets.
Charlie seems to be saying that there are multiple people who participated in Shorty's death who weren't prosecuted. We know that Watson was never prosecuted, and nobody has ever explained why that is. Vance is alleged to be present and holding a bloody knife, so participating in the stabbing, and Larry Giddings, aka Larry Bailey, is also alleged to be at the scene. Now remember those rumors about Cowboy Bill being an informant? What if those rumors started back then? Is that what Lynn is saying when she says he looked like a cop? Is that coded language for a rat? What if Charlie heard those rumors? One thing that I understood by examining the trajectory that led to the murders was that each killer was selected because of something they had done or failed to do before. Susan was sent to Cielo Drive because she had been present at Hidman's death and knew how it was staged. But she was also selected the following night, along with Linda Kasabian, because she failed to kill anyone at Cielo. Patty was selected because Charlie knew she was thinking of leaving. So was Leslie. Tex was selected because he forced Manson to shoot Bernard Crowe, who he believed was a Black Panther and believed was now dead. Grogan was selected to kill Shea because he'd gone along on the night the LaBiancas were killed, and later was dropped off in Venice with Linda and Sadie to kill more people, and they didn't do that either. Linda Kasabian was actually given 2 chances to kill, and she failed on both counts. She also told Charlie the night of the second round of the murders that she was pregnant, which this author believes is what saved her over the next couple of days until she could make her escape. Their children, the family's children, were untouchable, although apparently the concern for kids didn't extend to Sharon Tate's unborn baby. Now, Bill Vance is not only potentially a suspected informant. I mean, he shows up just after everyone else gets arrested during the raid, but we believe before they get out of jail on whatever stupid technicality released them. But he also had failed. Charlie asked Bill and Allie to go to Gary Himmons to talk to him about getting the money back for the mescaline deal, and they declined, leaving as soon as they heard about the murder. Tell me that if Vance was at Shea's murder 4 weeks later and days after his return from Oregon, it isn't also a targeted selection. Is that because Charlie was punishing Bill? One of those head trips for not dealing with Hinman? Or is it because he thought Bill might be a snitch and needed to get his hands dirty so he wouldn't rat them out? About 2 weeks after Shea's murder, Bill establishes a new driver's license under the name William Rex Cole. Just a few days later, though, he gets another license using the name Dwayne Schwarm. Dwayne is a resident of Portland, Oregon, and becomes yet another alias Vance uses. I believe Schwarm was someone Bill actually met during his trip up to the Pacific Northwest. Now, these two licenses are in addition to an existing license that Bill holds in the name William Joseph Vance, which Bill obtained in '65. That license lists his address as Spawn Ranch. See, he does have a relationship with Spawn Ranch. In fact, Bill has a very small acting role in a god-awful spaghetti porno film there called Linda and Abilene. Don't watch it unless you get high first. And that whole scene with him, as described by Lynette, reminded me a lot of the scene where Cliff Booth, Brad Pitt, visits George Spahn, Bruce Dern, at the ranch in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I wonder if Tarantino read Reflection and borrowed the idea for that suspicious meeting between Booth and Squeaky, although in the film, it's Pitt's character that's suspicious of little slit-eyed Squeaky Fromm, played by Dakota Fanning. There's not a lot of other information available on Vance then until his arrest at Barker Ranch on October 12th. That's the second day of the Death Valley raid. He uses the name David Lee Hammock when booked. Now, Diane Von Ahn, the young Oregon woman Vance brought back with him a couple months before, she's also arrested during the Death Valley raid. She stays in Independence for the next month with Sandy and Squeaky, then takes off with Vern Plumley back to Oregon. Sadly, she met the same fate as her mother. Diane was killed in 1972, the passenger of a motorcycle accident. The driver survived. Diane did not. It was just 10 years after the death of her mom, Patricia. Diane was just 22. A month after the Barker raid, Bill is among those present at the Venice Beach home where Zero kills himself, playing Russian roulette. Little Patty is in the bed beside him. Bruce Davis, Country Sue Bartell, Catherine Gillies, and Vance are the other occupants during the shooting. By the time police arrive, the gun, with every bullet in the chamber save the one that nailed Haught in the head, has been wiped virtually clean of prints. There is one small print on the grip, I think it is, of Bruce Davis's. And a lot of people have wondered if Davis might have actually shot him, or even if little Patty had. Me, I wondered about Cowboy Bill. So after police do their thing in Venice, Vance disappears again. He is off radar for more than a year, and when he's sighted, it's in western Missouri of all places. Journalist Neil Sheehan of the Stanbury Headlight visited an organic farm in nearby McFall after local residents told him a bunch of hippies were having some luck with tomatoes on rented acreage. So Neil headed to McFall and the farm in question, where he met 3 young people. One was Claudia Lee Smith, who gave the name Linda. One was Patricia Joan Baldwin, aka Little Patty. And the third was a young man from California named John Weaver, a college student from Ventura. Sheehan learns that the hippies call this venture Nubian Farms, and they're supervised by the Reverend William R. Cole, pastor of the Youth for Life organization, chartered by the Calgary Grace Christian Church of Faith of Florida Religious Enterprise. When asked what Youth of Life represents, Claudia Smith responded,
Total acceptance of all churches and beliefs with no prejudice at all.
The journalist did not meet Mr. Cole, but he was impressed by the farming efforts of the hippies, even though one of them, Little Patty herself, was surly and hostile to him. So Sheehan wrote about Nubian Farms in the July 22nd, 1971 edition of his local rag, complimenting them in a piece subtitled, They Work Too Hard to Be Hippies. Just 4 weeks later, Sheehan follows up his laudatory piece with another article. This time he has to inform the good citizens of McFall and Stanbury that those enterprising hippies at the tomato farm were none other than members of the bloodthirsty Charles Manson gang. Shortly after the first article appeared, however, in the Stanbury Headlight, investigators Whiteley and Gunther of the Hinman Homicide LAPD team showed up in McFall. They were looking for Vance, Cole, but more specifically, they were looking for an alleged recording the family made reenacting Gary's brutal 2 days torture and slaying. But Vance, Little Patty, Claudia, and John Weaver had all disappeared. They fled the scene just 2 days before Whiteley and Gunther arrived. Now, the investigators found another piece of disturbing news when they arrived. One of the buildings at the farm had been torched, allegedly by Little Patty. They also found a hospital bracelet at the scene for a baby girl born in October 1970 named Dawn. Dawn was the infant child born to Claudia Lee Smith. Was Bill Vance her father? Possibly. Ed Saunders visited Missouri not long before Vance, Smith, and Baldwin fled Nubian Farms, and it turns out he was the one who tipped off the investigators.
Toward the end of the Bruce Davis trial, I appeared at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, where I gave a poetry reading with music. A young couple approached me at the party afterwards and said they knew Bill Vance, and told me he was living in McFall in northern Missouri, posing as a minister named William Cole, who was driving a truck sporting the letters Youth for Life, which Vance said he'd received from a religious organization in Miami. I called Sheriff's Homicide in Los Angeles and told them how to reach Mr. Vance. He was in a house with ex-family person Claudia Smith. The legendary Little Patty, who had been in the sack with Christopher Zero when the gun went off, had also been living with Vance, but he told authorities she'd been institutionalized by her parents, who apparently resided in Pittsburgh, PA. Little Patty, I was told, burned down all or part of Vance's home, and so had been asylumized. Vance had supposedly run off with some of the better family music tapes. Sheriff's homicide officers were also told he had the tapes on which the family had recreated the murder of Gary Hinman. Sergeant Whiteley,
I went back to see him in Missouri and listened to a couple of the tapes, but they were just singing. I didn't hear anything that would relate to murder.
Little Patty, in a mental health facility we believe in Memphis, disappears at that point until yours truly locates her in her old stomping grounds in western Pennsylvania. She married in the 1970s, had one daughter before divorcing, and seems to be living a pretty quiet life. No more arson, we presume. In March 1972, Vance and Claudia Lee Smith were married in Ventura, California. And after that, nobody knew what happened to old Cowboy Bill. I looked and looked and looked, and so did countless other people. I thought I ran into an interesting prospect when I found a Facebook account for one William Rex Cole. The individual was a pretty rough-looking desert figure who lives in a kind of no man's land in the Inland Empire with a couple of pack mules as companions. That account even follows the Facebook page for Ottawa, the environmental movement inspired by Manson. I also found other Facebook pages for the same individual, although he went by different names, including Cuervo Klein. I even found some YouTube videos of Cuervo, and I searched and searched and searched for his face for signs that he was indeed Bill Cole. I didn't think it was him. The age didn't seem to quite add up, and the features were not exactly right. There's some similarities, but not enough for me. Bill Vance, William Rex Cole, whatever the fuck his name was, eluded me. I thought I'd never find that son of a bitch. Until now. Are you ready to learn Bill's real name and his history? Here goes. Bill was born William Joseph Law Van Sickle on April 17, 1933 in Kingston, Missouri, to a 16-year-old unwed mother named Fern Catherine Van Sickle. One reason that I struggled to find his biological information before is because I assumed, like other genealogists, that Van Sickle was his father's name. We don't know who Bill's father was, but we now understand where the name Vance comes from. Van Sickle, Vance. It's basically a nickname of his surname. Fern Catherine Van Sickle, Bill's mother, was known as Fernie Bell. She was the youngest of 9 children born to Elmer Van Sickle and Lavada Burr Van Sickle, who married in 1900 in Nettleton, Missouri. The surname Van Sickle is Dutch. Here's a picture of Bill's paternal great-grandparents. We can trace this branch of the Van Sickle family tree back to 1630 and the first person who arrived from Europe, Bill's 7-time great-grandfather Zacharias, who settled in America on Long Island and New Amsterdam, later known as New York when the British came in. Fernie's parents, Elmer and Levada, had 9 children in 15 years, 3 girls, 6 boys. 4 of their sons and 1 of their daughters wound up moving to Oregon. So when Bill went up to Oregon that week in August 1969, I believe he was visiting his family there. I also think this might explain how Bill wound up on the West Coast after his stint in Brushy Mountain State Prison. In fact, another uncle lived in California, although he had died in 1945. But his widow, Ruby, continued raising their 6 children near Chico, north of Sacramento. It isn't a far cry to imagine parolee Bill Vance Sickle making his way west to go visit his uncles, then south to visit his cousins in sunny California, eventually heading down to La La Land. But let's go back to Bill's childhood. Bill's mother was unwed in April 1933 and 8 days from turning 17 when she gave birth to her first child. A year and 8 months after Bill's birth, Fernie Bell delivered a daughter named Phyllis June. Here's a picture of Bill's younger sister in the early 1970s with her second husband. Now, we do know who Phyllis's father was, a man named Philip H. Lehman. The surname Lehman is either German or German-Jewish, but we don't know if this man might also have fathered Fernie's first child. I suspect he was not Bill's dad because just 7 years after the boy's birth in 1940, 21-year-old Fern and 5-year-old Phyllis are living in Kansas City with a 52-year-old man named Albert Hammack. David Lee Hammack, you'll remember, is one of Vance Sickle's aliases. Fern and Hammack married, although we are not sure when that occurred. But Bill isn't living with them, and neither is Lehman. Bill instead is living with his grandma Levada and her second husband, George Scott. They're in Breckenridge, Missouri, along with Levada and George's son Clinton, who is 16. So basically, Levada and Elmer, Fern's folks, divorced sometime before 1922. That's when Elmer remarried a woman named Fanny, and Levada would have married George probably around or before 1924, when their son Clinton would have been born. So little Bill is not living with his mother, and he's not living with his father, whomever he was. He's living with his grandma and his step-grandfather and his half-uncle, about an hour away from his mom and his little sister. It's not hard to picture what comes next. Juvenile offenses. In 1949, when Bill is about 16 years old, he is serving time at the Missouri Training School for Boys at Boonville. Bill and a buddy of his, Darrell Morrison, escaped from Boonville that December, stealing a truck and driving it to Columbia, Missouri, before they abandoned it in favor of another car. They steal 3 vehicles in all. In fact, young Bill Hammack, as he is known, his stepfather's surname, admits when caught by police that he's no stranger to stealing cars and has done it since before he was in reform school. He was sent to Boonville, in fact, for auto larceny. Does all this sound like someone else you know? When captured, the boys also had rifle shells in their possession, but no rifle. Bill and Darrell are caught and they're sent back to Boonville. But a few years later, old Bill winds up in Brushy Mountain State Prison in Petros, Tennessee, one of the most brutal and notorious prisons in America. Brushy Mountain opened just before 1900 in the aftermath of a coal miners' protest in which convicts across the state of Tennessee were forced into unpaid and dangerous mining situations. In September 1957, Bill's mother Fern was driving to Tennessee to appeal to the governor to pardon her son from Brushy Mountain. He was then 4 years into a 5 to 10 year sentence for burglary. So he likely was sentenced in 1953 and is expected to be paroled upon good behavior by 63. Unfortunately, Fern had a car accident on the way and did not make it to the governor's office. Nor do I think that Bill had a snowball's chance in hell of being released. But apparently, he wanted out real bad. Escapes from Brushy Mountain were so rare that they were newsworthy. Its most famous inmate, Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassin James Earl Ray, broke out of Brushy Mountain in 1977. And you guessed it, Bill Vance Sickle also broke out. In this clipping from a Hancock County newspaper article dated September 1958, you see young Bill Vance Sickle upon his capture by officers from 2 Tennessee counties. So Bill is in Brushy Mountain for a few more years and definitely not getting out early for good behavior. I was unable to locate his parole records, but if he has a driver's license issued in 1965 that places him at Spawn Ranch, it has to be before that date. We know nothing of his activities from 65 until around the start of 69 when he shows up again at Spawn Ranch after at least a year away and kisses a most unwilling Squeaky. And we know nothing of his activities after his marriage to Claudia in March 1972, except this. On September 11, 1977, Fernie Bell, Bill's mother, died in Missouri. Fern died at the age of 59 under the last name of her third and final husband. She had just the 2 children. Bill is listed as William Joe Cole, and he is living, according to the obit, in Lexington, Missouri. 2 years later, Claudia and Bill are divorced in San Diego. Now, I still show Claudia living in Lexington, Missouri until 2002. She remarried twice more, she is currently widowed, and eventually relocated back to California. Her daughter Dawn now lives in Florida. Lexington, Missouri in 1977. Divorced in 1979, filed in San Diego County. And that's the last I can confirm about old Cowboy Bill. Well, except one more little thing. This is most definitely not him. This man is Craig Allen Klein, born August 16, 1949 in California. He was exactly 20 years old on the day of the Spawn Ranch raid. But did he know Bill Van Sickle or have some connection to the Manson family? That I do not know. Now, could Bill have committed more crimes and wound up back in prison? Possibly. Did he keep up his pastoring and wind up running some Christian youth ministry in the heartland? Who knows? I don't know if Dawn is Bill's child or if he ever married again or had other children or where he is now. If he's alive, he would be 88 years old. And it's a little hard to imagine someone with as rough a history as Bill Van Sickle making it to that ripe old age. Then again, he managed to dodge a murder rap and escape without repercussion. He's capable of anything, including a long and surely colorful life. The second half of the mystery of Bill, what happened to him, is yet to be told. I'll keep trying, folks. I've also got episode 14 of the docuseries coming in the next few days. I want to thank you, viewers, for tuning in. Like I said at the beginning, I do get a little thrill when I find something that has eluded me and others for a long time. And thanks again to Dan and Jedediah. Your help is so appreciated. This was a huge undertaking and years in the making. We finally know old Bill's real name and a little bit about his life. There's more to learn, and I'll keep digging. In the meantime, I think I'm going to go celebrate. Cheers, y'all.